Hi, my name is Grace, I'm 13 years old and I'm gay. For me to stand here in front of you and say that is quite a nerve-wracking thing to do. Not because I'm at all ashamed about who I am, I'm proud to be gay, it's part of my identity. I don't just accept it, I embrace it. No, it's because I'm worried about how you're going to react. When I was first figuring out who I was around 3 years ago, and I was beginning to realise that my knight in shining armour was more of a damsel in distress, I decided not to tell anyone. Again, I wasn't ashamed to be me, I was simply worried about how people were going to react. Being gay wasn't something that was ever talked about. There were no openly gay kids at my school. The word gay wasn't mentioned in our health and relationship classes. In fact, I'm not even sure I remember thinking I was gay or that I was aware of the term. It was more just, I like girls. In fact, it was only very recently, around October last year, that I decided to tell people. I put together this idea, this concept that I like girls with the word gay. I was like, whoo, I'm gay, go me. I felt it was finally time to tell people. Let me tell you, although I've grown up in a fairly liberal area and my parents are completely unprejudiced, coming out was by far the hardest thing I've ever done. I was a mess. My legs were shaking. My hands were sweating almost more than they are right now. My mouth was dry. Think how hard that must be for someone who's grown up in a conservative area, whose parents are openly homophobic, whose friends use anti-gay slurs on a daily basis. No one deserves to go through that. Now, I have not, by any stretch of the imagination, had a hard coming out. My parents' love for me meant they continued to support me when I told them I was gay. But for many, this isn't the case. I'm here to talk to you today about how schools can drastically improve the lives of LGBTQ students simply through education. But I'm also here to tell you a story. That story is about a young girl, and that young girl is no longer with us today. One of the main reasons why I felt I couldn't come out is because I thought my classmates would have made fun of me. I thought they wouldn't understand what I meant, that they would call me names and generally not make school a very nice place to be. And I'm not alone in feeling like this. Did you know that 40% of students feel unsafe due to their gender expression and 60% due to their sexual orientation? Another thing which made me feel alone and isolated, something which scores of LGBTQ students say they feel, is the fact that when we had sex education, no one even mentioned the word gay. In addition to this, when we talked about our bodies and puberty, the topic of being transgender was never brought up. Things like this really build up inside, and many LGBTQ people find themselves not being able to cope. Did you know that 48% of trans youth under the age of 26 will attempt suicide, and that 59% self-harm on a regular basis? Even now, I'm not out in all areas of my life, as there are still some people I don't feel would understand or accept me. One of the youth organisations I go to, in particular, is a place where homophobia and transphobia is very common. The word gay is often bandied about as an insult and used even by the adult instructors. And when people talk about trans people they know, they often fail to recognise them by their correct names and pronouns. This isn't very welcoming and doesn't make for an environment where I feel it's safe to be me. Luckily for me, I don't have this kind of an issue at school, but for many this isn't the case. Did you know that 1/3 of LGBTQ students have missed a day or more of school in the past month due to fears for their safety? These figures are shocking, especially as they concern so many people. There's over 4 million LGBTQ people living in the UK. 6% of the population identifies lesbian, gay, bisexual or queer, and 0.4% is transgender. But what can we do to help? What issues should schools even be addressing, you ask? Well, for a start, there's bullying. 71% of LGBTQ students say they hear homophobic remarks every single day. These often come from their peers who have little or no understanding of what it means to identify as LGBTQ, and therefore mock those who do, simply because they don't understand the concept and they view it as strange. If schools were to educate their pupils on these identities, there'd be a much higher understanding and consequently a higher acceptance of them. This practice, in fact, has already been fostered in many workplaces. Lots of big companies have specific programs set up to educate their employees on this matter. By bringing this education into school, we can create a much more diverse and accepting environment much earlier on. The lack of LGBTQ education also often leads to people feeling like their identity is invalid, or there is even something wrong with them. If schools were to reinforce these identities are just as real and important as those of cisgender heterosexual people, then we could save these people from years of feeling uncomfortable about their identity. We could help them feel okay with who they are from a much earlier age. If gender was taught in schools, then dysphoria could be significantly reduced for transgender peoples. Many feel uncomfortable in their bodies, often without realising that they could be trans, causing them to feel like the feelings they have are abnormal and suppress them, meaning they live their lives as a gender they feel they're not. On the other hand, those who do realise are often so uncomfortable in their bodies, they undertake dangerous practices in attempts to look like the gender they feel they should be. Schools could help in the prevention of this by educating their pupils on the danger these practices pose. Following on from this, many employers may be missing out on capable young people. As I mentioned earlier, 1/3 of LGBTQ pupils have missed a day or more of school in the past months due to fears for their safety. If these pupils don't feel safe in school, then they will not be able to receive the same standard of education as their peers. If schools were to have better support programs geared towards them, these pupils will be able to feel safe in school and get the standard of education they deserve. Another big issue in schools is that of sex education. Surveys show that only 1/4 of UK schools teach LGBTQ sex education, and those that do often don't teach it effectively. This hugely disadvantages LGBTQ pupils, as many are left with little or no knowledge of how to have safe sex and what risk sex may pose for them. This has serious repercussions later on in life, illustrated by many statistics, such as the fact that HIV is still 3 times more prevalent in gay men than straight. As you can see, there are many issues that could be tackled through better LGBTQ education. The good thing is, changes are starting to be made. For a start, we're here today talking about these issues, which is wonderful. And many schools are starting to set up support programs to support LGBTQ pupils and are becoming more accepting of their identities. When I came out as gay, my own school, SWPS, was 100% behind me. So progress is being made, but it could be made much quicker. I'm about to read you a suicide note of a young girl in which she tells her heartbreaking story. It shows exactly why changes must be made now. This is an issue which we simply don't have time to sit on. If you're reading this, it means I've committed suicide and obviously failed to delete this post from my queue. Please don't be sad, it's for the better. The life I would have lived isn't worth living in, because I'm transgender. I could go into detail explaining why I feel that way, but this note is probably going to be lengthy enough as it is. To put it simply, I feel like a girl, trapped in a boy's body, and I felt that way since I was 4. I never knew there was a word for that feeling, nor was it possible for a boy to become a girl, so I never told anyone, and I just continued to do traditionally boyish things to try to fit in. When I was 14, I learnt what transgender meant and cried of happiness. After 10 years of confusion, I finally understood who I was. I immediately told my mum, and she reacted extremely negatively, telling me that it was a phase, that I would never truly be a girl, that God doesn't make mistakes, that I am wrong. If you are reading this, parents, please don't tell this to your kids. Even if you are a Christian or against transgender people, don't ever say that to someone, especially your kid. That won't do anything except make them hate themselves. That's exactly what it did to me. That's the gist of it. That's why I'm killing myself. Sorry if that's not a good enough reason for you. It's good enough for me. The only way I will rest in peace is if one day transgender people aren't treated the way I was. They're treated like humans, with valid feelings and human rights. Gender needs to be taught about in schools, the earlier the better. My death needs to mean something. My death needs to be counted in the number of transgender people who commit suicide this year. I want someone to look at that number and say, that's effed up, and fix it. Fix society. Please. Goodbye, Leela Alcorn. As the story shows, education in schools has the potential to make a big change in the lives of LGBTQ pupils. It gives us opportunities to support them and help them feel comfortable with who they are. As Leela said, education on this has to happen. The earlier, the better. Because at the end of the day, we are just like you, and we are so much more than just a label. We are not just gay, trans, lesbian, bisexual. We are athletes, tennis players, engineers, runners, writers, mathematicians, chefs. We are your brothers, your sisters, your sons, your daughters. We are your neighbours, the person who sat next to you on the train this morning, your mum's best friend from college, the mate your dad plays cricket with. We are people, and we deserve equal rights.